I don't think she can hear us anymore. Those were the first words that drifted into my ears that afternoon in the living room, so softly spoken that they were meant to float past me like dust. My daughter-in-law Jade said it with that sugary sweet voice she used only when pretending to care about me. And then came the second sentence, spoken by my son Eric, the boy I once fed from the crook of my elbow, the boy who used to collect pine cones and hide them under his bed. His voice was low, steady, cruel in a way I had never heard before. Good. If she can't hear, we can finally move forward with the insurance plan, the agent said Friday. We need her gone before then. That was the moment my heart stopped, not metaphorically, but in that strange suspended way where your body forgets how to beat, how to breathe, how to exist. I was sitting in my rocker by the window of our small old house in Marigold Cove, Maine, with the ocean breeze slipping through the cracked frame. My hands were folded in my lap, and I pretended deliberately, desperately pretended I was too deaf to understand. Pretended I didn't hear my own flesh and blood discussing an accident they planned for me. My throat tightened, but I stayed completely still, the way a rabbit stays still when it senses the fox nearby. Stillness becomes survival. It's strange how, at 72 years old, after surviving the death of my husband, the loneliness of widowhood, the weeks of eating soup from a can when the heating bill soared, I never once imagined danger would come from within my own home. My home, which my husband Thomas and I bought in 1984 for $47,000, after saving every dime from his job at the shipyard and my part-time work at the bakery on Union Street. We struggled, of course we did. We raised Eric on coupons, yard sale clothes, and the hope that one day he would be grateful, not indebted, just grateful for the sacrifices we made. I used to whisper to him at night, one day, you'll understand what love looks like, but love, as I learned that day, can be twisted, reshaped, eaten away by greed until it becomes unrecognizable. I heard Eric pacing behind me, each step a reminder of how grown he was now, how unfamiliar his presence felt. The insurance is $250,000, he said, lowering his voice. We need the money. You know I can't pay off the loan if she keeps living like this. Living like what? Breathing? Existing? Sitting quietly in my own chair in my own home? Jade responded in that brittle whisper, I told you, the guardianship papers are ready. Once she's declared incompetent, we control everything. But it's easier if she's just not here on Friday. I swallowed hard. Friday, just 3 days away. I remember reaching for my knitting needle then. Not because I intended to defend myself, but because holding something steady made me feel less like I was drifting out of my own life. They thought I couldn't hear, and so they spoke openly, carelessly, as if I were already gone. Jade said, she's old, Eric. A fall would be believable. The stairs are steep, and Eric replied, I'll talk to Mark. He said he could make it look natural. Mark, their friend. A man who owed money to God knows who. I sat there, breathing as evenly as I could, letting their voices carve themselves into my memory. When the front door closed behind them, I finally allowed myself a shuddering exhale. My hands trembled violently, but not from age. Fear comes with its own kind of shaking. I stared at the dust motes swirling in the sunlight and tried to piece together how we'd gotten here. It wasn't sudden. Betrayal never is. It begins quietly, like mold behind the walls, unseen until it has devoured everything. For years after Thomas died in 2016, I lived simply. My income was small, widow's pension and the $700 I received from renting our guest room to summer tourists. I kept the old Buick running with duct tape and prayer. I made quilts, sold pickles at the fall market, saved coins in jars. But Eric changed after marrying Jade. She came from a family that cared about appearances, the kind who leased BMWs they couldn't afford and threw parties with charcuterie boards longer than their dining tables. They had debt, heavy debt. I didn't know the exact numbers then, but I would later learn they owed nearly $25,000 to a private lender with interest that grew like weeds. In the beginning, They visited me every Sunday. Jade always brought gluten-free pastries no one asked for, and Eric said things like, "Mom, you should think about downsizing." Big house for one person. At first, it felt like concern. Concern curdled into insistence, insistence soured into pressure. They mentioned nursing homes, then retirement communities, then guardianship. The word guardianship slithered into conversations like a snake in the garden. "It's for your safety, Mom," Eric had said once. "You forget things." I didn't forget things. I forgot nothing. The first red flag came 6 months before the conversation I overheard. I received a hospital bill in the mail for a CT scan I never had. When I called, the receptionist told me, "Your son authorized it." The second red flag was the bank statement showing a $3,000 withdrawal I had no memory of. When I questioned Eric, he smiled faintly and said, "You must have mixed up the dates." The third red flag was the day my neighbor Nora knocked on my door and said she'd seen Jade taking photos of our staircase. "Weird close-up angles," she said. I brushed it off. I shouldn't have. Suspicion grew in me like a slow fever, the kind where you're not sure if your body is trying to warn you or trick you. I began second-guessing myself. Am I paranoid? Am I imagining things? Am I losing my mind? That's the danger of getting old. When you question others, they tell you you're confused. When you question yourself, no one tells you you're right. After overhearing their plan that day, I didn't allow myself a single tear. Tears are loud. Tears change breathing patterns. They would have known I wasn't deaf. Instead, I stayed seated for 20 minutes motionless until I was sure their car was gone. Then I stood slowly, gripping the armrest for balance. Though it wasn't age that unsteadied me, it was betrayal. Betrayed. Betrayed by the child I had raised. By the girl I had welcomed into my family with open arms. Betrayed by the blood that should have protected me. I walked to the kitchen. My legs shook, but my mind sharpened with every step. Survival has a way of cutting through fog. I opened the junk drawer and took out an old flip phone, my emergency phone, the one no one knew about. I charged it, hands trembling, and called the only person I trusted, my late husband's best friend, Michael. He had been a police officer for 32 years before retiring. When he answered, his voice warm as always, I felt something inside me crack. "Michael," I whispered, "I need help." He arrived within 30 minutes. I didn't tell him everything at first. Shame is heavy, and saying aloud that your own son wants you dead is like hammering nails into your own heart. But Michael's eyes softened, and he said, "Tell me exactly what you heard." I told him every word. He didn't interrupt once. He leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. "They're planning insurance fraud," he said gravely. "And worse." That word wrapped around me like cold water. Michael helped me set up 2 small cameras, one in the living room, hidden inside a ceramic vase, and one by the staircase where they intended to stage my fall. He also gave me a tiny audio recorder the size of a thumb. "Keep this with you," he said. "Record everything. Don't confront them yet." I promised him I wouldn't. Over the next 2 days, I pretended to be the same quiet, aging mother they believed I was. I let my hands shake more than usual. I repeated myself twice at dinner. Jade exchanged smug glances with Eric. They thought they were winning. On Wednesday afternoon, I heard Eric on the phone in the kitchen saying, "Yes, Friday. We'll meet by noon. She won't last the week." The audio recorder captured it. On Thursday, Jade brought me tea. Chamomile, my favorite, but the color looked off, slightly cloudy. When she placed it in front of me, she touched my shoulder gently and said, "Drink this while it's warm." I smiled, thanked her, waited until she left the room, then poured the tea into the sink. A sticky film clung to the porcelain. Poison? Sedative? I didn't know. I didn't need to know. The audio recorder caught her saying to Eric later, "She should be groggy by tonight." Makes it more believable. My breath turned to ice. By then, the cameras had recorded enough. Jade taking photos of the staircase again. Eric measuring the distance between the railing and the first landing. both of them discussing the insurance payout. But the biggest piece of evidence arrived by accident. While pretending to nap in my rocking chair, I heard Jade rummaging through my file cabinet. The camera caught her pulling out my birth certificate, social security card, and property deed. And then she said the line that sealed her fate. Perfect. These signatures will be easy to forge. On Thursday night, I called Michael again. It's happening tomorrow, I said. I need to be ready. He asked if I wanted him to arrest them immediately, but I said no. I needed them to expose themselves fully, publicly. Not for revenge, but for truth. For every old woman who had been called confused, paranoid, or senile when she was simply being preyed upon, Friday morning arrived like a storm. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I stood in the kitchen, pretending to make oatmeal while my heart thudded like a drum. Eric and Jade entered the room quietly, exchanging tense glances. Eric said, "Mom, can you help me upstairs with the boxes?" Just a quick thing. His voice was sugary, poisonously sweet. I nodded. My legs felt strong, unexpectedly strong, maybe fueled by fury or clarity or both. As we approached the staircase, Jade lingered behind us, her phone in hand, camera recording for their claim of a tragic accident. Eric walked slightly ahead of me, positioning himself exactly where Michael predicted. He turned, pretending to adjust a box, and said, "Careful now." That was his cue, his signal, his final betrayal. Before he could touch me, before he could push, before he could take away the years I still had left, the front door burst open. Michael entered with two officers behind him. "Step away from her," he commanded. Eric froze mid-motion. Jade gasped, lowering her phone. The officers approached swiftly, commanding them to place their hands behind their backs. Jade stammered, "This is a misunderstanding." Eric's face drained of color. Michael pulled out the USB drives, the printed transcripts, the recorded conversations, the video footage of them discussing plans, the photos of Jade holding forged documents. He read aloud their own words. Every syllable was a dagger. Neighbors gathered outside as officers led them out in handcuffs. I heard Jade scream. She was supposed to be incompetent. And Eric, my son, my own child, shouting, "You ruined everything." I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I watched them taken into the police car, watched the neighbors whisper, watched truth scatter like shattered glass across the street. The case moved quickly. Insurance fraud, attempted murder, forged guardianship documents, possession of a controlled sedative. The trial took place at the county courthouse, and though the room was packed, I sat in the front, spine straight, hands clasped around my cane. When Eric was asked why he planned to kill me, he said, "She wasn't using the money. She was old. We needed it more." Those words carved themselves into my bones, but they also freed me. Freed me from guilt, from doubt, from the weight of wondering if I had done something wrong as a mother. I hadn't. Greed had eaten him alive. Jade showed no remorse. She glared at me as if I had stolen her future rather than saved my own life. The judge sentenced them both to 12 years. I attended every hearing, every update, every proceeding, not out of vindictiveness, but out of duty to myself, out of dignity. Dignity they tried to strip from me. Dignity I reclaimed piece by piece. After the trial, Michael helped me secure my home, update my will, and establish a trust with two witnesses who actually cared about me. I spent weeks sitting on my porch, watching the ocean waves crash against the rocks, listening to gulls cry overhead, feeling the warmth of the sun return to my skin as if inviting me to live again. Truly live, without fear. The quiet that filled my home afterward was not loneliness. It was peace. I found comfort in small things again: the smell of blueberry muffins baking, the feel of warm laundry, the sound of my wind chimes dancing with the breeze. I made new friends at the senior center. I planted dahlias in my garden. I learned how to use a tablet to watch mystery shows. I found pieces of myself I didn't know were missing. In the months after the trial, I realized healing is its own kind of journey. People think justice arrives like a bolt of lightning, that once the gavel drops, everything painful disappears. It doesn't. Pain lingers in the corners of your home like the scent of old smoke. I found myself waking in the middle of the night, gasping, certain I'd heard Eric's footsteps on the staircase. Sometimes I sat on the edge of my bed with my hand over my mouth, trying not to cry too loudly. Not because I was afraid someone would hear, but because it hurt too much to hear myself grieving a son who was still alive yet no longer mine. One morning, I walked past the staircase where they planned to end my life. I stood there longer than usual, touching the railing, feeling the coolness of the wood beneath my palm. A thought came to me, sharp and painful. They had measured this railing for my death, but now I was measuring it for something else, my survival. I whispered to myself, "You're still here." Saying those words aloud made the air inside my home feel different, almost lighter, as if the walls themselves were relieved. A letter arrived from the prison not long after. My hands trembled as I held it. It was from Eric. I wasn't sure if I should open it, but some part of me needed to know what he could possibly say. Inside, written in his familiar handwriting, were the words, "You turned everyone against me. I hope you're happy. No apology, no remorse, just blame." I folded the letter and placed it inside the drawer with my old recipes. Not out of sentiment, but because some wounds need to be stored away, not destroyed. Destroying them gives them importance. Storing them gives you power. I went to visit my husband's grave the next morning. The cemetery was empty, the early morning fog rolling across the stones like a soft blanket. I placed a fresh bouquet of white lilies beside his name and sat on the grass, knees aching but spirit steady. "Thomas," I whispered, "I think you'd be proud of me, for a moment, just a moment." I felt the warmth of the sun break through the fog, and I allowed myself to believe it was his way of answering. Life began settling into a new rhythm after that. Nora, my neighbor, visited more often. She brought homemade bread still warm from the oven, and we talked about everything from quilting patterns to the best brands of arthritis cream. There's a strange comfort in simple conversations. They remind you that the world hasn't ended, even if a part of your heart feels like it has. One Saturday afternoon, I went to the Marigold Cove Community Center for the first time in years. Inside, a group of women my age were gathered around a long table covered in yarn, knitting needles, and half-finished scarves. A woman named Linda waved me over with a bright smile. "We've heard about you," she said, not with pity, but with admiration. "You're stronger than most people, twice as young." I felt a warmth spreading through me then. Something I thought I had lost, belonging. I picked up a pair of knitting needles and joined them. In the weeks that followed, old routines became new comforts. I cooked meals that filled the house with the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken. I repaired the squeaky porch step Thomas always meant to fix. I bought a new quilt for my bed, deep blue with white stitching that reminded me of ocean waves. I even adopted a senior cat from the shelter, a gray tabby named Myrtle who liked to sit on my lap and purr as if she were trying to stitch my heart back together. But the biggest change came when I received a call from a woman named Rachel. She introduced herself as a representative from an elder advocacy group. She had read about my case in the local paper. "Your story matters," she said. "It could help others who are being manipulated or gaslit by their own families. Would you consider speaking at one of our events?" My instinct was to decline. I'm not a public speaker. My voice shakes even when ordering from a restaurant. But then I remembered the fear I had felt in my own home, the way I had doubted my own mind because people I loved told me I was confused. If my voice could steady someone else's, maybe it was worth the trembling. So the following Thursday, I stood on a small stage in a church basement, hands wrapped around the lectern. The audience was small, maybe 20 people, but their eyes were kind, attentive, searching. I took a deep breath and told my story from the beginning. My voice did shake, but it did not break. When I finished, there was silence for a heartbeat, and then applause rose around me, gentle but powerful. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes and said, I thought I was losing my mind. You made me feel seen. That moment alone was worth all the pain I had endured. When I returned home that evening, the house felt warmer than it had in a long time. Myrtle rubbed against my leg, purring loudly. I sat in my rocking chair, the same one where I once pretended not to hear my own death being planned, and felt something I had not felt in months. Hope that life, even broken life, could be beautiful again. Hope that old age didn't make me disposable. Hope that survival meant more than just living. It meant living with purpose, and so tonight, as I sit by my window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, I know this truth with absolute certainty. My story is not a tragedy. It is a beginning carved from betrayal, strengthened by justice, and softened by the small joys that make life worth living. I survived because I listened. I survived because I trusted myself when no one else did. And I survived because even at 72, I chose to fight for my dignity. And now I ask you, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have fought for your truth the way I did? If my story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something deep in your chest, I ask you to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like mine reach others who may be living in fear. Together, we remind the world that justice isn't just for the young. Justice belongs to everyone.